Okay, welcome to the fourth video, and it's time we do something really different from the previous textures. And I'll say this now. This really is my favorite texture because what we're going to be doing is the body of the car. And the reason this is my favorite texture is because it's not too complex, and you can really make a big difference with the graphics and the colors there. So that's why I prefer working on it. Now, one thing I'm going to do here. This texture consists of a few very different parts. You have the metal and the car paint on the outside. There's the wood on the inside, and there's the leather on the inside. And unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, just these textures happen to be separated not by geometry edges in my low poly. So what I have to do is, in my high poly, I'm going to create a specific assignment of colors, which I will use to render a mask for these textures in my final diffuse. So I've created three different colors here. These happen to be red, green, and blue, RGB, and I've assigned them to the three different areas: the car paint, the leather, and the wood. Once that I've assigned them, they're self-illuminating textures, so they just emit a solid color. I'm gonna do the same baking that I did for the normals, but instead I'm rendering a diffuse map. And I'm rendering it to a 1024 size because I don't think the body needs a 2048. That's just over the top. A 1024 will do just fine. And I'm just doing a few settings here to make sure that everything renders correct, to make sure that the padding is right, and I can render things now. And there we go. Pause the render, and so that went a little bit faster. And here you can see what I just rendered. Now, this might not look too efficient to select things out of, but I'm just going to open the normal map as well. I'll show you in a minute how this is going to work exactly. And as always, we get the bug when the rendering the normals go inverted. There we are. I'm going to copy these, then go into this file and paste the normals here, and then create a folder named normals. I'm going to render the template for my body at a 1024 size, and apparently I had a selection, so I have to do it again. There we go, 1024, 1024, render the UV template, and save it as body template 1024. There we go. With that done, I can just open that file in Photoshop, copy it, apply it on top of all my layers, set it to blend mode screen, and reduce the opacity a little bit. There we go. Now back to my layers. As you can see, the mask is per channel. I just have to go to the red channel and control click that. I can immediately use it as a selection. So now I'm just going to create a few different masked layers in my diffuse folder. One for the car paint, one for the leather, and one for the wood. And once that is done, I can just simply get rid of, well, just hide that ugly RGB layer, because it looks ugly by itself, but it works perfectly fine as a mask. Once that's done, I'm going to open the ambient occlusion that I rendered here, and I might have to redo this ambient occlusion. Once I have the ambient occlusion, I'm just going to fill things out with color. Red for the car paint, dark brown for the leather, and let's see what I pick for this. A different tint of brown for the wood. I mean, the difference is going to become more apparent later on when I start adding the actual texture. So once I have this basic set up, I can start doing some more tricks here. I'm going to apply the normal maps, and you know what I'm doing right now is, like I said, the ambient occlusion that I rendered is an ambient occlusion that does not use the normal maps for this low poly part. So I'm just going to re-render it in the V-Ray method that I talked to you about a few videos ago. I'll just go over it again. The V-Ray method means that you can actually use your normal maps to render your ambient occlusion, which is a very nice feature. It means you don't have to do the baking, and it pretty much combines low poly and a cavity map into a single render pass. Downside is it's a little bit slow and it's kind of complex in settings, but if you know the settings, then well, it should work out. Right, so I'm adding an element here, V-Ray complete map. I'm not using projection here. That's not really the best idea. And that was my render. It doesn't look optimal yet. I need to make a few tweaks. Setting geometry to dynamic, which makes a difference in speed. Setting it to brute force, and then increasing the subdivisions. This is going to slow things down a little bit, but that won't be noticeable for you guys in the video. Also remember to unhide everything that you want to affect ambient occlusion. As you can see, that's what I forgot here. And I'm just going to pause this, and there we go. It's still not perfect. The reason for that is that the lights were on. I forgot to turn off the default light. There we go. That's the ambient occlusion we're looking for. This looks pretty good. We can definitely use this. Once we have that, we can just open the, I'm just looking for it, chassis V-Ray complete map, that's what I'm looking for. Low poly body complete map, that's what I'm looking for. Drop it in here, copy everything, delete the old ambient occlusion, paste in the new one, set it to multiply, and I'm doing a few settings here. I'm going to use reduce noise, which is a pretty cool filter to actually reduce the noise in the ambient occlusion map. If you fiddle with the settings a little bit, you can get it a lot smoother. You might not have been able to see the noise in this video, once again compression settings, but it was definitely there and the filter definitely improved it. So consider that one when you have a noisy ambient occlusion pass that you want to improve. I was really surprised by how well it works. I mean, most of the time you'd figure like, oh, stupid filter, it won't work that well, but this one definitely does. So now I'm using the new diffuse texture I just created, using the new ambient occlusion texture also, and it looks like the seams for the mask are absolutely perfect. Imagine having to create this by hand, by painting it. That would never work, but rendering them from an actual mask with a high poly element with different materials per element works really good. Okay, so yeah, I'm liking this. It's time to get started. One thing I really need to put some work in is the front end of the body, which is actually called the firewall in the car. And this firewall, it has quite some detail on it. I have a picture here, and this is going to be my main reference. You can see there's lots of interesting shapes and holes and forms and bolts and nuts on there. That's what I want to create on my texture as well. So you can see this is a really good candidate to do some 2D normal mapping on. So here we go. Let's get started with this. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to use the shape tool to draw some shapes on this thing. That hole there is where the steering column comes through, so I'm definitely going to have to add some detail there. And I'm just going to create some big broad shapes here first. Checking back to my reference to make sure I'm doing this right. Without reference, I'd have a hard time doing this because I just can't make up this sort of stuff by myself. So these will be deeper holes. I'm duplicating it to the other side. I want it to be sort of symmetrical, but not entirely because, well, of course, the steering column's on one side. Once I've done that, I'm going to create a few more. And select the wrong color here. Just hit D to reselect default colors. Creating some round parts. And I want to go back to the round rectangle now and create some of these capsule elliptical shaped parts. Just adding a few here and there. I want to make sure it's not too full, but that I'm sort of covering every area with some interesting details. Also make sure to vary this with indented details and details that actually pop out of the car, so darker and wider ones. Duplicating that one over there. And I'm drawing these shapes and then just merging them down if I duplicate them, etc. I'm just keeping this all in one layer to not overcomplicate things. Right, so doing some selection here. And this one I select manually, just filling it out with black. It's a new layer, don't worry about the ones that just disappeared. Rounding off the corners manually, this one will be a little bit difficult to create with the shape tool, so I'm just manually painting and rounding things off. Using a brush to carefully paint at the edges. And I'm going to do the same thing here. Pretty sure I can create an interesting shape for this one. There we go. Having them intersect, turning it black, and then just using my brush and the eraser to round off every corner. There we go, round off that corner, that one as well. And that should be the last one. That looks pretty good. So okay, now I have my my layers here. And I want to make sure that all these values work out together. Also, I'm remembering to duplicate all of them to a separate layer because I want to use them in the diffuse as well. So don't forget that before you start messing up these layers and turning them into normal maps, don't forget to duplicate them to your diffuse because you're going to need them. So this is my first part. These, as you can see, I blurred them because if I didn't do that, the transition would be too hard. So I'm just applying a Gaussian blur to have sort of soft transition between the bump map edges. With that done, I've deleted the area around there using the duplicate layer I just talked about. And then I'm creating a gray layer here, and I'm just going to paint a little bit more details like some holes here and there. And selecting a smaller brush and drawing some things like, I don't know, rivet holes, whatever. It doesn't really matter. I just want a good balance between large, medium, and small scale details. That done, I've merged everything down, performed a little blur on it so that everything's softer, and then do my X-normal filter. I've that done, so I can just select this, and the duplicate layer that I saved will be used to delete the parts of the texture I don't need. So look at that, I've created this really interesting firewall normal map. I'm just going to save these body normals again, and well, I've made a little mistake here of leaving the ambient occlusion on, so I just got to turn that off and save it again. My bad. And here we go. That actually looks pretty cool already. If I combine this with some diffuse details, this is really going to look like an interesting area on the car. So right, turn off the normals and back to the diffuse. I'm going to use bevel and emboss on these parts. Now, a lot of people are big haters of bevel and emboss. I definitely think they have their purpose, especially if you're doing this sort of stuff. I think they can definitely work. So I gotta invert them, tweak the opacity a little bit, the light position, and yeah, that looks okay. Now these parts, they have to change in color. I've duplicated them to a separate layer because they're actually indented, while the other parts, they pop out of the car while the other parts actually sit inside the car. The parts that are holes, I'm actually giving them this gray outline, and that's just because I saw that on the reference. I think it's because these parts aren't painted, so you can actually see the metal through, but it definitely helps like make them pop out, shows the details a lot. So again, adding the bevel and emboss. Key here is being subtle and not making it too fat. You especially have to keep the bevel and emboss small in radius and size. We look at that. That's already a lot better. Once I start adding this to the specular, it's really gonna work. So see, I think this is really fun to work on. Some simple details, and you can really have something look quite believable. Key here for me to make this look good was finding a good reference image. Doing this just from the top of my head, that wouldn't have worked. I really wouldn't have known where to start. So finding a good reference image was pretty important. I think I looked for something like a T-bucket firewall, something like that. Right, so I'm renaming my layers a little bit so I know what I'm working with. And to add some more small scale detail to my normal map, I'm gonna have a layer with nuts and bolts on them. It's just really simple. You create a brush with a single small round tip and then increase the spacing, and all you have to do is click around and it creates entire lines and rows of nuts and bolts, which is a really simple way to add more detail. Adding some on the top. Gotta increase the spacing a little bit. The only problem is you don't really have control about where the final one will be. A big helper here is using the shift key in combination with drawing with your brush tool. It helps draw straight lines. If you click and then shift click, it draws a line between 2 points. If you hold shift and draw, it draws lines at 90, 45, 180, that sort of angles. So very handy. And I'm just adding bolts everywhere on the underside of the car where I think they will fit. You probably won't even see these, but I don't think it's a bad idea to add them. They don't have their place in the interior, though. In the interior, all the bolts and construction details are hidden away. Everything will be leather. So now I just created a black and white layer, turn these into a normal map, and then use my normal map blend action where I do the blue channel trick and everything that you saw in the previous videos. And then just duplicating my bolt layer to the diffuse as well. I'm saving it again. I just want to have a look at what it's going to look like in Max. And yeah, I'm going to make sure these bolts are gray. Also very important for these bolts, you can give them a slight outer glow with black. You gotta make sure to change the blending mode from screen to normal or multiply, but that sort of fakes the ambient occlusion around these bolts. And look at that, that's looking a lot better already. Man, I really like how this is looking. Told you this was going to be a fun part to work on. Okay, this is looking pretty good. I think I can start looking for another part to focus a little bit on. I'm just thinking about what I'm going to do with the colors of this car. Alright, so I have all my extra layers here. I'm just creating a new folder for that because there are so many here. I just want to group them in one folder and not have them bother me. And like I always do, special overlays, I dump my ambient occlusion in there, and I create my special highlights layer there where I paint in some highlights on obvious areas of the car. So I'm just looking for the correct settings here. A slightly white brush with a very low flow can help bring out some highlights in this car. And I'm painting on like the really obvious areas where speculators and highlights will be. I'm deliberately not using a color here because I'm not sure what color the car will be, and I'm also pretty sure that I might create some different color variations of this car. Okay, and some slight highlights on the edges there, and another one on these edges. Okay, now that I've done those highlights, I'm just going to save it again to have a look if there are no seam problems, and to me it looks like there aren't any, so that's good. Well, there's maybe some slight problems there, and so I'm just erasing a little bit on those parts. Okay. These are really subtle details, but I think they're necessary to make an interesting texture. And there's also a very slight ray miss on my my seat here, which I'm just gonna fix right now. It's just a problem in the mask, so all I gotta do is paint some white over there to fix that up. There we go. Patched. Okay. With that done, I can start thinking about the seat leather and the body paint. So I'm just creating some new folders here because I know I'm gonna have a lot of extra layers per material in this car. So there's the body paint, there's the seat leather, and there's the extra dash folder, as I called it, which is the wood for the dashboard. I'm just gonna dump all the dashboard stuff in there. So there we go. Right, I've created a white layer for the body paint, since, as I said, I'm not sure what colors I'm actually going to use here. And what I'm doing now is I'm going to experiment a little bit with graphics on the car, and this is really one of my favorite things to do. I'm just using the pen tool here to draw some interesting shapes, and I'm not even sure where I got the idea for these shapes. I think I might have seen them on, I don't know, an airplane or something. But the idea is just to experiment with graphics that I can use on the car. Now with the pen tool, I'm not that much of a pro with it, so I always have to adjust later on. If you don't know how to adjust, you got to use the white little arrow that sits underneath the text type tool. And with that white little arrow, you can just edit your pen tool points and curves afterwards. This is something I didn't know for like 3 or more years. I only found out about that a few years ago, and it's really made working with the pen tool a lot easier in Photoshop. So right now I'm just spacing these points apart to get them a little bit uniform in shape. I want a really strong graphical design on the body of this car. It really has to stand out and make the car pop even more. A solid color, no way. It can be way cooler than that. So I decided to add a slight extra one at the bottom there. Gotta do a little bit of spacing again due to that one, but it shouldn't be too hard. Once again, I'm all doing this with a tablet also. Some people don't use the pen tool with a tablet, but I just prefer to use it for everything. And yeah, I like the shape of these things. Now I gotta continue them over the top of the car. I don't think I'm gonna put these the spikes on the top, the hood part of the body, but I'm gonna continue the red line, that's for sure. Okay, so I want to make them a little bit longer and more pronounced. And their length can be a little bit random. I don't mind that. I like the randomness in their length. I don't like the randomness in these ends though. I gotta change that a little bit. Yeah, that's okay. Alright, so right now, this is a little bit tricky. Well, not that tricky. I mean, just have to eyeball it again. There's no fancy trick for this other than me trying to align this part with that single edge. So there we go. That's the shape for the top of the car. And I also have to do one for the bottom, which should be really easy. Just creating a new shape here. Click and click here. If you use Alt on a curve handle, you can adjust it on the fly. It's another trick I didn't know for years. And the entire front end of the car, I think I'm going to make that red because it's going to look weird if I don't. So just go around. So definitely remember that for creating graphics on a car, it definitely pays off to use the pen tool. Now you might be saying, oh, you forgot about the right part of the car. I'm just going to duplicate that layer. There we go, duplicate the layer and then move it up, and that should be about it. Now I can save that, have a look, see if there's any seams. And yeah, as you can see, there's some seams at the bottom. I didn't align it perfectly. I'm not too sure about the white color though. The white main color for the body, I think I can do better than that. well, the gray color actually, but it's way too light. I think I got to use a darker color. It has to contrast more with the engine. Now it looks like everything is the same value. I don't want that. Some slight tweaks to these shapes as well. The graphics have to look a little bit organic, but they also have to look like they were painted in a neat manner, not too sloppy. So that's where the pen tool comes in handy, because you can just keep adjusting. Move this slightly, save it again, and let's have a look. And that looks like it's perfectly aligned. So I'm happy with that. Now that I have the basic shape down, I think I can experiment a little bit more with the colors here. I'm using an adjustment layer, and I'm making the body a lot darker. Like, I think I might go for a dark gray, almost black. Never use complete black, always use dark gray. Yeah, that's looking better, but now the black and the red are blending too much into each other. So I'm gonna have to change that around a little bit. This really isn't too much texturing anymore. It's more graphic design, color choices. So I'll try to explain a little bit how I'm thinking about this. But as you can see, the difference between the black and red is not good enough yet. So I'm just going to look at my reference a little bit, how they're doing this. There's some white here, so white might be an idea. Is there any interesting ones? There's some white lines here. So yeah, I'm thinking I'm probably going to use a white line between the black and the red. That's really going to make things pop out even more. So how will I do that? Well, that's really simple. Just use a stroke. Set the stroke to white. Make it 1 pixel. Well, 1 pixel might be too thin. I'm going to put it at center, outside, inside. Not sure. Outside 2 pixels. There we go. Then just copy the style, select all the layers, and paste it on all of them. And then just save that. And let's have a look, and yeah, this is a lot better already. I'm definitely liking this. There's a slight problem there with a floating pixel at the end though. It's kind of weird, but that shouldn't be too hard to fix. But see, this is the reason why I really like doing these car bodies. I mean, you can make these really broad, simple changes, and you get instant satisfaction by it looking a lot cooler or getting a totally different vibe from the car. It's like respraying real cars, but just in a virtual way, which is a lot faster and a lot less trouble. Okay, so I'm just creating a new folder named decals where I'm dropping all of these into, there we go, so I can just unhide them one at a time, or all at once. Okay, with that done, I think I'm going to have to concentrate a little bit on a different type of material. Body main colors, just renaming that layer. I might have to tackle the leather next, although I'm not too sure. Going to CG textures, and yeah, we're going to do the wood first since it's a simple one. I'm just going to look for a decent wood texture that I can use to do the dashboard of the car. I'm looking for one that has an interesting texture that I can use. Fine wood. This one looks pretty good. I mean, there's some interesting detail in there, so I'm just opening this, selecting everything, going to my extra dash layer, pasting this wood layer, and then just rotating it and dumping it over there. And I'm trying to get like an interesting part of the wood into the dash. I'm also stealing this part and rotating it to dump it on top of the last missing part. Now here's a thing about texturing wood. Texturing wood for a lot of beginners is just taking a photograph, dumping it on top, done. No way, never. It never works like that. Wood is for me, one of the trickiest parts to get the exact color values right. It's really, really difficult to get it right. So as you can see, I just tried a lot of blending modes. Right now I've activated the color balance editor, so I can actually balance the colors in a specific way. Really, wood that you take from a picture, it's never right from the start. You have to do a lot of tricks and color adjustments to get it right. I want it to be slightly warm, yet still believable, yet a little bit worn. So I'm going to have to do a lot of tricks on this. So that's looking a lot too red, so I'm going to have to reduce the saturation. And this is going more towards what I like. Got to change the hue a little bit. So as you can see, I've got 3 adjustment layers on top already, and I'm just getting started. Well, first I got to check how it looks on the car. And yeah, that looks okay. It might be a little bit too red, but I'm going to change that when I paint the worn stuff on it. It doesn't have to be the same wood as the steering wheel. I really don't care about the fact that it would match or not. Alright, so I have my 3 adjustment layers. What I want to do now is paint some wear on the wood. This wood is varnished, and if it sits in the sun, the varnish is going to wear off, the wood is going to change color. The places where it gets touched more, the wood changes color and the varnish dulls out. So I want to replicate that sort of effect. Also, once again, it didn't seem to take me really long to get the colors for the wood right. But the first few times I did this in other textures, I really had to put a lot of effort in. I did tricks like duplicate the layer on top, overlay specific colors, blend the layer onto itself with a special blending mode. I mean, don't be afraid to try anything to get the colors right. But right now I'm just going to leave the wood a little bit for what it is, because I want to work on all parts of the texture a little bit, just to get a general look of this thing right. Now what I'm doing here is I'm painting some shadow ambient occlusion. You could call it dirt, just to make the details pop more in the seat. As you can see, the baked ambient occlusion isn't working too well in the center of the seat, and I just want to get these things right with their colors. I mean, even though there wouldn't be any ambient occlusion, the colors of the seat are going to be darker in like the indented parts of the cushion, like in between. And I'm adding an outer glow layer. It's really making this stand out, which I like. There we go. Click, shift, click. That's what I'm doing all the time. It's the fastest way to do this. Manually stroking it will be way too much work. It might look a little bit over the top now because it's just gray, but once I start using colors, it's all going to make more sense. So I can't forget to do it for every indented part of the cushion. There we go. It's a little bit hard to see here also, because it's kind of dark. Okay. Now, I've left the seats gray until now, but I'm not too sure if that's the exact color I want for those cushions. But I'm just going to start off doing the generic stuff that's really color independent. So the highlights first. Really want to make these things pop. I mean, they have a great normal map. If you have a great normal map, you can make it look even better if you paint in a lot of shadows and highlights yourself. So the highlighted areas, I'm just painting them in. Look at what a difference this is making. I mean, this is really going to help make the seats look really good. Just manually clicking and creating those highlighted areas. That looks great. I'm really liking where this is going. I wouldn't even have needed the ambient occlusion for this part with the stuff I'm painting in manually if it wasn't for me not being able to tell where the exact lines are. So I'm just, look at this as sort of an improvement on ambient occlusion. There we go. Okay, now I'm going to make it a little bit broader and paint in some highlights on the big cushions. There we are. And Then just use the blur tool to blur this stuff into each other a bit more. This one's tricky since this cushion is kind of flat, but I think that looks okay. I'm going to do a broad one in the center. There we are. And as you can see, I think if you ask me, one of the tips to make a texture look a lot better as an area where beginners struggle with is to paint in ambient occlusion, shadows, lighting, highlights into a texture. Even though in this next gen era you'd say, oh, that isn't necessary and nobody does that. But no, I think it really makes a difference. Definitely helps things pop. We're not in an age yet where real-time rendering has all these advanced effects of offline rendering, so you still got to help it as much as possible by making your textures look fantastic with painted in lighting. So there we are. Alright, for this video I don't think we're going to do that much more. Maybe a slight few tweaks here and there. Fabric, yeah, we might try to get our base leather in there. So I'm looking for a good leather here, and I'm mostly looking for a good texture. The color doesn't really matter to me. I want to get this base texture down right. What I'm doing is changing the contrast because I want to get this into like a normal map, and I'm creating a pattern out of it. Now, why a pattern? A pattern is so much easier to apply because you can scale it. Setting this to a scale of 10, that's not really working. What about 25? What about 15? What about 15 seems to work okay. 10 looks okay as well. Setting it to overlay and then reducing the opacity slightly on that. So yeah, that looks pretty good. And I want to get that into my normals as well. So I'm taking this to the top and applying the layer mask into it, and then using X normal to change it into a normal map. Now, very important with these noisy normal maps is that you don't apply them full strength. I mean, you've got to really tone them down in strength so that it comes off as convincing. With that done, that looks okay, but it's still a little bit too strong. So I've set it at 30 and it's still too much. I gotta take it down to 10%. Some slight noise in the texture. Yeah, that's looking okay. Right, close some of these reference images I have here and just have a look at some other reference images to get an idea of what I can still do. I really like the interior on the yellow one. This one, I'm going to make that my example of what I want to create. So I'm not really happy with the color here. I'm going to change that. I want this slight beige interior. Look at how it's working much better with the red and the dark gray already. Yeah, this is definitely the way to go. Okay, so I have this beige interior, special overlays, and set them to linear burn so I can get some more interesting burned shadow areas. It's a trick I explained to you before. Alright, I'm going to save this again as a TGA just to have a look at how it's working, and yeah, that looks okay. I know it doesn't look great yet with these stupid uniform specular values, that's why I'm turning them off. And yes, as a color by itself, I definitely like how this is working. Okay, see if we can do anything more in this video. It's probably just some small tweaks left. The really interesting texturing on this will be for the next video. Just having a look at the car in general, how everything is working together. Turning up the active lights. Yeah, I think this is looking pretty good. Okay, that's it for now, and we'll see you in the next video where we'll be doing the details and the dirt and grime on the body texture.